This is what the Lord says. This is Nathan talking to David. Out of your own household I am going to bring calamity upon you. Before your very eyes I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will your wives in broad daylight. Later on, Absalom did precisely that in his rebellion and in his revolt against his father David. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel. God makes a prediction. Then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. See? Well, here's the ruler of the land, and he's responding to the placer of the word, and he's saying, you are absolutely 100% right in what you are saying. I have sinned against the Lord. He didn't want to confess that sin. He was going to hold that sin back for as long as he possibly could. Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die, but because by doing this you have made the enemies of the Lord show utter contempt, the son to you will die. Well, here we have an example of, I call it a POW, a presenter of the Word, or a placer of the Word, someone who places the Word before the rulers of the land. And in this case, David melted. He melted underneath the power of the Word of the Lord that came through Nathan the prophet. There are different examples in the Bible of where you have a placer of the Word, a POW, goes before the ruler of the land, and there are different reactions from the ruler of the land. You notice King Herod, he caved in to the treachery of his wife, the hatred of his wife, and he finally called for John the Baptist to be murdered and his head to be placed on a platter and presented to that little of Herodias, his wife. That is how some rulers of the land will respond. It's not an easy thing to be a POW, a placer of the Word. But in the case of David, why, he didn't imprison Nathan, he didn't bind him and wait for the opportunity to have him put to death. No, rather, he caved before Nathan, and he says, I'm like 1,000 pieces on the floor. I have sinned against the Lord, and I hate what I have done. So that at times will happen as well. One is in, let's call it an unrighteous kingdom with King Herod and Herodias. The other is in the righteous kingdom with David. And in the righteous kingdom, why, let's say Nathan is spared, words are received, and you could say some health is restored to that kingdom. But now if we go into 1 Kings in chapter 13, we come across a situation which is, shall we say, most difficult, because we're talking about the kingdom of Israel. The house of Israel is divided from the house of Judah even before there was the dividing up of these two kingdoms. But what happens basically is that the house of Israel breaks free. It breaks free like a huge, let's say, piece of ice from the Antarctic coast. It just breaks free and is floating away on its own. Excuse me. And what you have is you have the rebel king. Rebel king over the 10 tribes of Israel to the north. And this rebel king basically says to the people under his control, he says, don't go to Jerusalem any longer. Don't go to the temple of the Lord any longer. I'm going to give you a replica of that religion, only it's not going to require you to go to the temple in Jerusalem. I'm going to set up a golden calf in the south, and I'm going to set up a golden calf in the north. And along with these golden calves, we're going to have priesthood, but they won't come from the line of Levi. They won't be from the line of Aaron, who was within the tribe of Levi. We're going to just select anybody who can bring, shall we say, a couple cattle he can become the priest of the golden calves in Bethel and Dan. Bethel being on the southern border, Dan being on the northern border. So you have rebel ruler Jeroboam, and he now has the 10 tribes of Israel excuse me, under his grasp, and he is taking them all away from the Lord, the God of Israel. And the Lord was the God of Israel, of course, and he's taking them away. He's providing a substitute, a wretched, a ugly substitute, and all the people are being forced into this this different religion. And we read about that at the end of 1 Kings and chapter 12. So now what you basically have is you have the ruler of the rebel kingdom, and we find him offering up sacrifices on, let's call them the rebel altar in Bethel and the southern, near the southern tip of the nation of Israel. And what happens is God says to a POW, a placer of the word, who lives down in Judah and who serves the Lord, he says, you go up into the kingdom of Israel and you speak some words before Jeroboam, this rebel king, and you tell him what I want for him to know. And that's one of those cases, again, where you're having a truth that's got to be spoken to power, the power in the land. And it's a dicey situation, as you can well understand. But now what you have is this man, he goes up before Jeroboam, the king of the rebel tribes of the north, and he makes a prediction. He basically says, Jeroboam, there's going to arise out of the, let's say, the landscape of the line of David, there's going to arise a man by a certain name, and he gives the name. And he says, this man is going to dig up the tomb of your priests, and he's going to sacrifice their bones on this altar one day. Might be 200, might be 250 years from now, but it's going to happen. Jeroboam, ruler of the tribes to the north, who are in great rebellion against the Lord now. It's like they've altered their religion to accommodate their political allegiances, which have shifted away from the line of David, which dwells in Jerusalem. Now their allegiances have been shifted over to Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who is in no way a descendant of David the king. Well, what you have now is you have this POW, this placer of the word, who says to Jeroboam, this is what the Lord, the God of both Judah and should be God of Israel, wants for you to know. And so we have a confrontation here. Believe me, sparks are going to fly. They're going to fly all over the place, because you've got a man from Judah who has been told by God, go up there and give my words to that man Jeroboam. So we read about that in 1 Kings and chapter 13.